Travel in 10, Episode 45, The Relaunch.
This is Travel in 10. And now, your host, David Brody.
Hello, and thank you for downloading this episode of the Travel in 10 podcast. For those of you who have been listening for years, or those of you just tuning in for the first time, you'll probably notice that this is our first podcast in a couple of years now, first new episode. We've been doing this podcast since back in 2005, making it one of the first travel podcasts, if not the first travel podcast, online anywhere around the world, and continued to update with new episodes, but haven't put a new episode up now in several years. But people continue to download it, even without new episodes. It continues to get a few thousand downloads a month of people tuning in and listening to the podcast or watching some of our video casts, both on iTunes, on YouTube, and other places around the world. And really want to start off by just saying thanks to everybody who has continued to download the cast, and wanted to provide some new content for you coming up this year. So I want to start off with today's show, just talking a little bit about what the podcast is for anybody who may have not heard it before, how it got started, and what's going to be coming up. So first of all, what it is. What we've always tried to do is provide you with short, really actionable advice on great places to go around the world. What you can see and do, everything from festivals, events, hotels, restaurants, from all corners of the world. Wanted to provide it in really a short, easy to consume format. So try and keep all of our shows to 10 minutes or less in some cases. Just really a quick thing that if you're at the airport, if you're driving in your car to work one morning, thinking about an upcoming trip to Hawaii or Bali or wherever you're going around the world, looking for some recommendations, that it gives you a quick idea of what you might be able to experience in some of those great places around the world. Most of it we try and do as audio casts, just really giving you a sense for interesting new places to explore and some recommendations on how to get there and what to do. A lot of it is either recorded or videotaped in the destinations that we're talking about on each cast, or in some cases we do interviews with interesting people in the travel industry, everybody from Arthur Frommer from the Frommer's Guidebook series, who we've interviewed in the past. We've interviewed hosts from Travel Channel TV shows from different destinations, and we'll look to keep bringing you some of that content as well. How it all got started, I started this podcast, as I say, back in 2005 on a round-the-world trip. It had come after several years working in politics. I worked in a job with the former Canadian Prime Minister, and decided after a few years of doing that my wife and I both really wanted to get some international experience. And we were having dinner one night at a Thai restaurant in Ottawa, in a place called the Byward Market. Great area of Ottawa with lots of great restaurants, nightclubs, and a great weekend market. And there's a Thai restaurant that we like to go there from time to time. And over dinner one night at the Thai restaurant, we started talking to the waiter and mentioning that we were really interested in going to Southeast Asia. And during the course of the conversation, he started telling us about this amazing festival, the Songkran Festival, that happens every year in Thailand, which is sort of a Thai New Year's festival, but really unique cultural celebration, all kinds of different things happening around the country, and talked about how it really turns into just this massive party, one of the biggest water fights anywhere in the world, and a great time and a great celebration. And over the course of that dinner and listening to him explain it and tell us more about the destination and what we could experience there, we started talking about it. And by the time we had finished dinner, decided to sell our house, sell our car, put all of our stuff in storage, and go on a 1-year trip around the world. And that's exactly what we do. About 2 weeks after that dinner, we were out on the road and started our trip. Began in Hong Kong, then into Thailand, throughout Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Malaysia, back into Japan, where we worked for about 6 months. And then we came back in throughout Southeast Asia for the remainder of the trip. It was an amazing experience. And during the time we were working in Japan was really when some of the first iPods were coming out, and noticed that they're in Tokyo. Tokyo, for anybody who's been there before, tends to be ahead of anywhere else in the world in technology. They had an amazing new Apple store in Ginza when we were living there, and went in, was playing around with the new iPods as they were just coming out, and started to hear some of the first podcasts that were happening. And I believe it was a museum in Japan that had started doing audio guides of the museum that you could do on your iPod with a podcast. which gave me the idea of doing 10-minute shows about things to see and do in Tokyo during our time staying there. And that's really how the podcast started. And if you go back to our first few episodes, you'll hear it's all focused in on Tokyo. I think we even called it Tokyo in 10 to begin with, where it was going to be 10-minute shows on things to see and do in Tokyo. And right off the bat, it attracted a great audience of people from around the world. One of the things that always surprised me is the number of countries that people were downloading it from and number of people listening to the podcast from around the world. So started putting up episodes around cool things to see and do in Tokyo. And anybody who's ever been to Tokyo, you probably could have stayed there for the next 15 years doing nothing but podcasts just on that, because there really is so much to see and do in Tokyo. But as the podcast continued to get downloads, and as we went back on the road traveling back throughout Southeast Asia, decided to start focusing in on other destinations as well and try to provide brief sort of clips that you could really experience while you were traveling. You know, if you're at the airport, in your car, just easy to digest content that in a quick 10 minutes or less gives you a sense of a destination and some things to go see and do. So that's really how it all started. And from there, have continued on providing different recommendations on things to see and do around the world. Got to interview some really interesting people in the travel industry and continued on with the podcast from there. In terms of what's going to be coming up, certainly I think we're going to be doing more audio casts than video casts in the next little bit, although we've got a great video cast, I hope, coming out on Paris here just in a few days, where we're going to be showing some of the best of what to do in Paris if you're traveling there with children. And that's one of the things that's changed about the podcast as well. Is initially, it was just the two of us traveling around the world, focusing in more on boutique hotels and concerts, events. Now it's still a lot of those things, but also combined a bit with family travel, given we're traveling together with now a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old who are both very well traveled. We've got a lot of great video and audio content actually that I've gathered in places like Costa Rica, throughout Europe over the last couple of years that just haven't edited and got online yet, and going to be trying to get more and more of that up online over the summer. We'd love to hear from any of you who have been listening to the podcast of what you like, what you find useful, or destinations that you would love to hear more about. You can either go onto our Facebook page, the Travel in 10 Facebook page, or onto iTunes. Would love to get your reviews, your comments. That's always incredibly helpful to know what you're finding useful and what you'd like to hear more about. After the Paris podcast, we've also got some content on Cozumel, Mexico that just finished recording. We're going to get online right away. And we've got travel coming up to Bali, Indonesia, Hong Kong later this year. So getting back to Southeast Asia, where we started the podcast, and some destinations that I haven't been back to in probably the last 13, 14 years since we've been to some of those places. So looking forward to getting back to them, seeing them from a different angle, and doing some more podcasts from those destinations this year. In terms of continuing to follow the podcast, the best place to get it for sure is by subscribing on iTunes. You can also subscribe in the new Google Podcasts app. And now, using a lot of smart devices, if you go onto your Amazon Alexa and ask to listen to Travel in 10, it'll pull up the latest episode for you. Same with Google Home or Google Assistant. You can ask it to play the latest Travel in 10 podcast, and that's another easy way to get it and hear some of our latest content. Or on Siri, if you're driving in the car or on your phone, just ask to hear the latest Travel in 10 podcast, and you can get it that way as well. But would love if you could subscribe on iTunes, check out some of our videos on YouTube, and let us know what you think. Jump on Facebook or on Twitter and let us know what you found useful in some of your past travels. Any recommendations that you would like to share that we can pass on to our listeners, and would love to hear from you. So thanks to everybody who has continued to subscribe. We're going to have more podcasts coming in the next couple of months, and hope you continue to enjoy it.
Thanks for listening. Download more of our travel shows from around the world at www.travelin10.com.
This has been a presentation of Travel in 10.